Dr. Axel Grothey was one of my earliest mentors when I was doing my training up at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. Dr. Grothey is quite possibly the most recognized worldwide expert in colon cancer, in advanced colon cancer. He's an expert speaker and really has been a leading trialist in the space of GI malignancies and colon cancer for many years now. When we talk about clinical trials, there's lots of different types of trials: interventional trials, treatment, modifying old treatments, combining new drugs. Dr. Grothey has led the development of new drugs for the treatment of colon cancer. He's led trials in new combinations. And very importantly, he's led trials in optimizing existing therapy. There was a day and age when post-operative colon cancer treatment was 24 months of therapy, and now with research from Dr. Grothey's group up in Rochester and others, that's now down to 4 to 6 months of therapy. So less treatment, less toxicity, same efficacy. Very important questions for patients. So you might say that's all well and good. Dr. Grothey practices in Minnesota, and who wants to go to Minnesota in January? So the real pleasure of this introduction is the fact that we have successfully recruited Dr. Grothey to come join our faculty here in Arizona. And coming in March, he will be the new chair of hematology oncology here. So Dr. Grothey, please.
Thank you very much for these kind words, Alan. Words I can't live up to, so you know that. So I'm very honored to be here. I love the Southwest of America. Actually, in 1991, apparently I talked to one of my co-residents. I would love, coming from Germany, I'd love to move to America, and I love to go to the southwestern part of America, because I love desert, I love Arizona. I don't know why I ended up in Minnesota. So when you ask, so the title of my talk is what's in it for patients in terms of clinical trials. And when you ask me what's in it for me coming to Arizona, this is what's in it for me. You see, this is currently what Rochester looks like. And when I left, it was kind of 5 below zero. And just sitting outside, talking to people was great. So I love to come here. I hope we can jointly make a difference, because cancer treatment and advancing cancer research is very personal to me, because I'm a member of a cancer family. Almost every one of my family died or was affected by cancer. My mother had breast cancer, died of pancreas cancer. My grandfather died of colon cancer. My grandmother of cervical cancer. My aunt of breast cancer. My father of prostate cancer. So there's a lot of cancers around. And I know how much cancer affects not just one person, but a whole family, a whole network, everyone who cares about the patient. So it's very important to me that you realize that I'd like to advance cancer research, cancer treatments, out of a very personal perspective. And I want to give you some ideas, and I hope we can turn to the slides. What is cancer right now, and how do we make progress in beating cancer, improving survivals, decreasing symptoms from cancer? There are 1.7 million cancer cases diagnosed in 2018. These are data that just came out last week. 1.7 million. And you can see the spread of different cancers: prostate cancer diagnosed commonly in men, and breast cancer in women. But in terms of how many patients die of cancer, it's actually lung cancer that really leads in men and women. And we're losing almost 610,000 Americans, patients, to cancer every year. Every year. That is way too much. In 1973, Richard Nixon proposed this war on cancer and established comprehensive cancer centers like the Mayo Clinic Comprehensive Cancer Center. Now, how do these 610,000 cases compare to other important casualties, more or less? Let's talk about the annual US cancer death, 610,000 patients. If you look at every single patient, every single soldier dying in combat death, battle death in the history of the United States, it's about the same ballpark, 670,000, including civil war. If you look at all the casualties in war the United States has ever fought combined, it's about twice as many as we have cancer deaths every year. Now, the federal budget overall is $3.9 trillion. The Department of Defense, and this is not a political statement, this is a statement about prioritization. What is important for us? Where do we want to make a difference? Department of Defense receives 15% of the budget, $584 billion, and the budget for the National Cancer Institute, which is supposed to advance our knowledge about cancer, improve cancer outcomes, cancer that affects every one of us. Here, $5.4 billion, about 1.3% of the budget. I can tell you that in my life, cancer has been probably the dominating health care that I had in my family. I would like these numbers to go up. Now, the good news is we're actually making progress. These are the new cases. You see the cancer trends, left for men and right for women. You can see there is, especially in prostate cancer, a decrease in incidence, which has various reasons, also how we screen, but also lung cancer with a decreased incidence of smoking. There's actually progress. And this manifests itself in a decrease in cancer death. We have been actually quite successful in overall decreasing cancer mortality in the United States. And you can see on the right-hand side down here, the mortality for men and for women actually is going down. This is great. We're saving lives. And you can actually project how many lives have we saved since 1991 when the trend changed. There are actually projections in 1991 that we would have a red line, an increase in cancer deaths over time in correlation with an aging population. You can see the curve leveled out. We have saved 2.3 million lives since 1991 when the curve trended differently. That is what we've done with research, with different screening programs, with changes in lifestyle perhaps. And well, lifestyle changes actually cut both ways. We have an obesity epidemic which will counteract some of the healthier lifestyle choices we've made. Population screening, of course, is important. We can vaccinate against cancer. We should utilize that. That's not even captured yet in these statistics. But we also have better therapies. We treat patients better. And you heard earlier from Dr. Decker and from Dr. Bryce, that there are more and more patients living with cancer in the country. 20 million people in the projection in the near future. So people you might meet on the street might be cancer patients, cancer survivors, and you don't even know that. And then, in my 29 years of being in oncology, almost 30 years now, being in oncology, this is the first time that I think we are at the verge of breakthroughs. We won't cure all cancers, but we have better understanding about cancer more than ever and better therapies. Some of these therapies are breakthrough therapies that we integrate into our clinical practice. Immunotherapies, for instance, really have been a game changer for a lot of patients with lung cancer, melanoma, kidney cancer, colorectal cancer, gastric cancer, stomach cancer. So we're doing better. So how do we get these breakthroughs developed? How do we make sure that we give data that the FDA eventually shows us, yes, this drug, this new treatment option, this new paradigm is worthwhile for us to approve and get it paid for eventually, because all these new therapies are quite expensive. So the nice thing is, we have actually seen an increase in the FDA approval of cancer therapies. And you can see there's kind of a cut point in 2010. These are the numbers of drugs approved for cancer in the United States per year. You can see there was a sluggish time from 1995 to 2010, and then it ramped up. And this is the result of the better design and better conduct of more innovative trials, better understanding of cancer research, and a change in FDA perception that we need to make drugs available to patients earlier than before, and not have patients wait and potentially die, before they could get access to innovative treatment options. So the important point is, today's standard treatment was yesterday's clinical trial. That is, I think, the most important message you can take out of this session here, because, we are standing on the shoulder of everyone else who has been enrolled in clinical trials before. Clinical trials are important research tools to move us along to improve outcomes in various different ways. And I'll give you some examples what it means to improve outcome, because improving outcome can mean curing more patients, but also having less side effects of a treatment. All matters depending on the clinical setting. So what are clinical trials? Clinical trials are more or less experiments in humans, and this sounds bad, but it's highly controlled because we protect the rights and the safety of everyone who enrolls in a clinical trial. Physicians who enroll patients in clinical trials are very mindful about the willingness of these patients who enter these trials to kind of donate part of their life to potentially get access to better therapy, but also potentially make a difference for other patients that come after them. A clinical trial is in a controlled environment so that we know really what kind of outcomes is affected by a new treatment, that there are no errors in judging whether this treatment works or it doesn't work. Now, why do we do clinical trials? Can't we just use mice or cell cultures and whatever? And unfortunately, and I've known this from my own laboratory experience, laboratory studies and animal studies really do not reflect exactly what's going on in humans. Nothing beats the evidence that we see when we run a clinical trial with definitive outcomes, so we really need to have that. What if we just go back and look at retrospective data, see how patients were treated and really correlate the outcome? The problem is this does not give us a clear understanding between whether factors are correlated or affected by causal relationships, that one intervention causes a better outcome. Just to give you an example, what is correlation and causation here? Smoking gives you wrinkles. You know that. Smoking can also give you cancer. So wrinkles and cancer are correlated, but wrinkles don't cause cancer. You know that. So this is the difference between correlation, causation. You need to run a clinical trial to really figure that out. What is happening here? What is the reason why something else happens down the line? So how do we engage patients in clinical trials? And that's very important because we need to inform patients. We need to provide the platform, the reason why we run a clinical trial, and translate this not also particularly into minority populations who are very resistant to get enrolled in clinical trials for various reasons. So before the study, there needs to be some education. We need to inform you about clinical trials. And I know that a lot of you, actually my patients at least, that I see, they shop around, they try to look for resources to get access to clinical trials for themselves and for their loved ones. But also during the study, I think we are obliged to inform patients what happened. What are side effects that might have occurred, that they might be affected by? And after the study is complete, I think we have to, and this is actually mandated now in a federal law, that we report the results back to our patients. Because you need to know what happened when you got enrolled in a clinical trial. Was it worth it? What happened down the line? What are the outcomes? How did this trial change our clinical practice? So just to give you an idea how regulated and how controlled the clinical trial conduct is, these are all the components we have in a clinical trial. Writing a clinical trial is writing a research grant. It's all meant to protect the scientific validity of the study, but also patient rights, patient safety. And the critical point is the informed consent form. That's something that we spend a lot of time really trying to figure out, that patients are informed enough, but not overloaded with useless information, which can blur everything and create a lot of noise that really distracts from really what's happening in clinical studies. It's not perfect the way it is right now. There are a lot of legalities around it, but we're trying better. And the best communication, of course, beyond this paper that you might sign, is the communication with your physician, a trusted physician. So let me dive a little bit, not too much, but a little bit into some details about clinical trials you might have heard of. They're different in conventional drug development. There are phases of clinical trial. Phase one, we go from animals to humans, early trial designs, new drugs, very experimental. We mainly look at how safe are these drugs and how we use the smallest number of patients needed to really establish the safety. And some of these drugs make it to phase 2, when we look at more specific indications, like specific for breast cancer or lung cancer, lymphoma, prostate cancer, and then see, is it worthwhile to move these drugs forward into a larger comparison with standard of care, where we say, is this standard of care that's currently there better or worse than the new treatment that we have that's coming down the pike? That's standard drug development. The problem is this takes a long time. This takes more than a decade in a lot of instances, and we need to do better. We need to do better. We need to develop drugs faster. And I don't want to belabor this. There are single-center trials. There are multi-center trials. The current challenge is that we want to make trials available to a larger group of patients, because a lot of patients, a lot of trials that we run right now select patients based on certain genetic features, which might be only about 2% of breast cancer, 1% of colon cancer. So we need to screen the whole population, more or less, to find enough patients to run these studies which have much better efficacy, potential efficacy. Not one size fits all. Everyone gets treated in the same way, but really targeted toward what patients' tumors, what patients' makeup is. Now, one thing I want to talk about is placebo. What's a placebo? And placebo sounds bad, because no one wants to be in the placebo arm of a study. And unfortunately, in some instances, we have to run a placebo control, a lookalike substance that has no activity but also no side effects. But not every study has a placebo. And I have this commonly when I talk to patients about a clinical trial. They say, will I be enrolled in a dummy drug trial? The minority of trials actually has placebo controls. Most of the trials that we're running right now do not carry a placebo. And if we have a placebo, it's only as a last resort, because otherwise would not be able to really decipher what the activity of a certain new intervention is. What are the questions we might ask? They are so-called endpoints. What are we really targeting? Primary endpoint, secondary endpoint. And I'll show you some of the examples here. And I don't want to go through all these things, but just to give you an idea of what we're looking for, what we can try to achieve in cancer clinical trials. Number one, we want to cure more patients. Cure. Cure is actually a very loaded word because it's kind of an after the effect. We only know down the line, in retrospect, in the rearview mirror, where patients really get cured. A lot of times I am happy with turning it's a disease into chronic disease, and patients can live with their cancers and have, hopefully, a normal life expectancy. A lot of cancers are like that right now. We want to have longer overall survival, longer time until tumors progress, better symptom control, and better quality of life. That's an important point. It's not just the duration of bite, but also the quality of life that really matters. And we already talked about less toxicity with maintained efficacy, and that's something that Alan brought up earlier, and I'll give you an example for that. Actually, quality of life is interesting. There's a trend, and I like this trend a lot, to have patient-reported outcomes involved as endpoints in clinical trials, meaning we give treatments, and we actually ask patients, do you feel better or worse? So we have patient-reported outcome parameters in the endpoints of clinical trials. And this is something that was actually groundbreaking in 1997 when the standard of care for pancreas cancer was developed. At that time, pancreas cancer was a very bad disease. Still is not a great disease to have, but we've made a lot of strides. And the question that I had for my patients is it worthwhile getting any treatment? It might not really help me. Can it improve my quality of life? And the study that actually brought us the standard of care really used the new parameter to really design and find out whether this treatment works, the so-called clinical benefit response. This was not survival, this is not tumor shrinkage, not a CT scan, but patients were asked, how's your pain? How much can you do? How much are you active around? Have you gained weight? And had these improvements been sustained? And when they ran the study, they could clearly see that patients who received this new treatment had a much better clinical benefit response, here in red, than patients who did not receive the treatment, and they lived longer. So if a patient asks me nowadays, what about my quality of life on chemotherapy when I have pancreas cancer, I can say we have data that your quality of life will be better when you get treatment than if you don't have treatment. I would love to have these data for all cancers, because quality of life matters. And now we've improved outcomes, and I showed this is the only two Kaplan-Meier curves that I show statistics. Forget about this. Gemcitabine, this new treatment in 1997, is no longer standard of care. We're actually doing much better than at that time. Now, decreasing toxicity. Question is, in adjuvant treatment, after resection of a cancer, like in breast cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer, we commonly give additional chemotherapy. Now, a lot of patients are cured by surgery. We do not need additional treatment. Now, we don't know who these patients are, and we treat everyone alike. And in colon cancer, which, as you heard, is my field of interest, there's this FOLFOX and CAPOX therapy, oxaliplatin-based therapy, which out of 100 patients can cure about 7. But we don't know who these patients are. 7 patients get cured because we use this treatment, but 100 patients get affected by significant side effects. In particular, oxaliplatin here, neuropathy, numbness, tingling, and those of you who have received drugs that cause nerve damage know how cumbersome that is and how it can affect your quality of life long term. So we needed to run, and this is another study, a study that showed, okay, we can decrease the toxicity, but we don't want to change the efficacy. We want to still cure as many patients as before. That's not easy. So we had an international effort, the so-called International Duration Evaluation of Adjuvant Therapy in colon cancer, led by Mayo Clinic, where we had 6 different studies worldwide conducted with a total of 12,834 patients. That's the largest effort ever conducted to show that we can decrease the toxicity, the side effects of treatment without compromising efficacy. And we did it. We actually ran the study, three months of treatment versus 6 months of treatment, and we showed, you can see it here, the neuropathy for FOLFOX and CAPOX, 2 different chemotherapy regimens, decreased significantly with shorter duration. And when you look at the outcomes, and this is the curves that I show you now, is there's no difference, whether you use 3 months or 6 months. And a lot of patients now would say, in retrospect, we over-treated them. We treated them too long. We inflicted too much side effects. And if you look at it from a healthcare perspective, in the United States, we're going to save $400 million a year just by shortening the duration of treatment. And including, we will not afflict patients with toxicity, have them miss work, time with their families, etc. So the problem, though, is we're at a threshold, we're changing how we conduct clinical trials. I showed you the old paradigm, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and then an FDA approval. That takes a long time. And I can give you an example. The old way of doing it, there were in non-small cell lung cancer. So lung cancer, about 1,600 phase 2 trials in about 15 years, and only 7 drugs got approved. What a waste. If this was what you do in, manufacturing iPhones, and you need 1,600 iPhones started in production, you get 7 that work, you would close your shop. So we need to do better. We need to do different things. Failure of the old drug development system, it takes too long, it is too expensive, and most of these phase 3 trials that really set the new standard of care fail. And we have actually moved away from these old paradigms to very better and more cancer biology understanding design of clinical trials, where we target specific features of a cancer and are much more effective than ever before. So there are challenges, because tumors are heterogeneous. There is, when we block one molecular pathway, another one comes up. There's a lot of crazy molecular biology, because cancer cells are complicated. And I'll show you how complicated cancer cells are in this here. This is how a cancer cell works. Actually, this is not how a cancer cell works. This is actually a slide that my wife showed me to show me how a female brain works. Compared to a male brain where it's only 1 drop at a time, yeah? And I cannot argue against that, yeah? But this is really more or less what it is. Okay. Now, what does Mayo Clinic do? Mayo Clinic right now has 790, I counted them yesterday, 793 trials open for enrollment for cancer therapy. Mix of phase 1, 2, 3 trials, biomarker-driven trials, various mechanisms of funding, some federal funded trials, some philanthropy, company-sponsored trials. We need a mix, a healthy mix of these funding resources. With a very strong phase 1 program, early therapeutics, we want to give patients access to innovative treatment options before they move their long way through clinic and to eventually to approval. We are actually, and this is very important to note, Mayo Clinic as its enterprise is the center of the largest research effort in cancer, actually in the country, being the Biostatistical Data Center for the Alliance of Clinical Trials in Oncology and the Center for the ACRU Network, the Academic and Community Cancer Research United Network, which I have the honor of chairing. And most of these trials are really biomarker-driven, selective trials, not this one-size-fits-all or have a biomarker component. Now, let me talk a little bit about ACRU and why I think this is important, because it's a Mayo Clinic effort. We are the center of a network including all the large academic centers, MD Anderson, City of Hope, UCSF, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Dana-Farber, Moffitt, you name them. And all the trial effort is coordinated at Mayo Clinic, where we can have, for instance, when companies come to us, we say we have a new drug that we'd like to develop, it's one contract, one budget, we can open the study in the whole country, including community sites. Again, this is coordinated by Mayo Clinic. Why would we need this large effort? Why would we need this large network? And I already mentioned, we have new trial designs. We're selecting patients based on their biomarkers. 2% of patients with breast cancer, 1% of patients with prostate cancer. So we need larger networks to identify these patients for these so-called umbrella, basket, and platform trials. So what's that? So umbrella trial is you have a single disease like colon cancer, and you biomarker test this disease, and you select different treatment options for different patients. So not one size fits all, but really different approaches for different subtypes, genetic, molecular subtypes of patients. This is reality. This is not future. This is happening right now. Or a basket trial is, a lot of cancers share same features. Breast cancer has similar features than colon cancer and gastric cancer in terms of certain interventions. So we can profile these different tumor types and treat them in the same way. And you'll hear more about this when we talk about immunotherapy. There's a revolution happening right now in oncology and in cancer. One of the studies we're going to run through this network is so-called Colomate, which is we're using liquid biopsies, blood draws, where we identify tumor fragments and can profile patients in terms of what the molecular makeup of cancer is, and then have specific interventions. Now we can use the whole network to screen, and we'll have centers of excellence here on the right-hand side with these stars, including Mayo Arizona and Mayo Rochester, where these treatments will be administered to patients. And the goal is really to have these basket trial and umbrella trials as a cancer-made study, meaning not just colon cancer, but any other cancer. The structure is we're profiling your cancer, and we'll we'll give you the opportunity to go to institutions where these trials for your cancer are open. How do you find the right trial? Talk to your provider. But of course, the internet resource, and I think a lot of you are familiar with those. This is something that I hand over to my patients. And I think, with clinical trial participation, we can make a difference. We are on the verge of breakthroughs for a lot of various different cancers. Never been more excited in my life, my oncologic life, than right now. With that, I'll close. I'd be happy to take questions, or you can corner me when you go for coffee. Thank you very much.